Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is October 3, 2021. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here on Rob Grant's amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Thank you, Rob Grant.
My pleasure. I'll catch you guys later.
I
Thank
hope you
you.
tune in and we'll have you back with a astoundingly insightful question.
Well,
So
don't
this
get your hopes too high.
so this is interviews number 5. We're here with Noreen Ahmed. Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
Yep, that's me. That's
Noreen, what a pleasure. And you're calling in from where?
Venice, California.
Venice, California. That's where I am, the coolest place in the world. Okay, Noreen, what's the best thing for a human being?
Oh, okay. Jumping into this. Love,
Love is
connection. I don't know.
no, would you say after love?
Connection. I think that's
Connection.
in the same realm.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. It's Marcia McLuhan's grandson I interviewed 2 days ago said love. I get love a lot is the best thing, and it is a good answer. I mean, you can't get better than love. That's that.
Answers a
What's
lot. Yeah.
yeah, what's your favorite form of information? How information comes into you?
What kind of information?
That's good. You won right off the bat. You're answering a question with a new question. That's what we're all about is inventing new questions. So all these questions you put into the context you want. And then it's more like we're after your hunch, your intuition, your impulse. It's not like if I ask you a question that might be deemed as, oh, that's neuroscience. It doesn't mean you have to be a neuroscientist to answer. You can go with your hunch. So
Sure.
if I say, what's your favorite way of receiving information? Then you put in the context you want.
Sure. So, well, I guess if we're talking about information and all the broad terms that it could be, I'd say whatever kind of reaches me. So there's different, and it's interesting. It is kind of making me think of a conversation I had recently about like things that intuitively are told to you and things that are external. But it's really what comes to you. So like wherever that information is reaching you at a certain point in time and space is probably because you need that information right there. So I don't have one source where I would say, and I am giving the more abstract answer of this because I'm like, it can change all the time, and it has continuously changed the way that I get information. But it's whatever reaches me when I need it.
Right. No, that's beautiful. And it is. When I asked my mother if I could interview her, she said, well, all the answers I give you today, they might change for tomorrow.
Yeah.
So the fact that I'm not holding you to any of these, this is a free flowing conversation. So that was good because it's sort of like form and content. It's like information can come into us through direct experience, through reading, through music,
Right.
through many sources. But it's more I was after the form, but you almost did what we tried to understand is that you can't separate form from content, that they're so integrated, but we invented these two different words. So we think. So you almost touched on one of my favorite answers ever in 35 years. Norman Klein said, what's your favorite form of information? He said, honest. And
I like that.
he shifted me fishing for a noun and he shifted it to an adjective. So this is fine, you get it. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Uh, it's really, I guess, it's whatever reason that we need to operate, and that goes beyond maybe what we have as information as human beings and as a human life form of why are we on this planet, why are we living every day this kind of Groundhog's Day experience of every day for that it would go into an answer to that. But yeah, I think it's you're gathering information so that you can operate more functionally and productively than you would without that information. So it's to live better, really.
To live better. I love that. I think our mission on life is to make the world a better place. I love this word better. But when you drop that metaphor for Groundhog's Day, what did you mean? Suss that out. I don't understand that.
I guess the experience of Groundhog's Day is this Bill Murray film, for anyone that doesn't know, where it's he's going through the same day over and over again, and so which is really reflective of we get night and day every single day for a whole life, and so there's this pattern that continues every single day for a whole life, and when you go through that, you can either live it the same way every single day, or you can find ways to grow through it and educate yourself towards a more productive way where you can be happier and the people around you are thriving better because of the circumstances that you're put in, which cause suffering for you or people around you and life around you. So it's finding a way to go through this kind of pattern, this changing your form through these day-to-day pattern.
Yeah, no, that was good. I understand it. Now, do you think this need or want for humans to collect or gather information is more innate or more invented?
Probably both, because we learn it. It's like medicine. All these things have been learned from centuries and centuries, and so the idea of gathering knowledge, like the scientific method, is something that took centuries for people to develop and form and go, this is a really solid way to get more information. These 7 steps that you go through, or whatever the strategy that you use to observe and then take that information and learn. So I think a lot of it is learned, but I think it's also, what started that, and it's some kind of drive towards improving. And I do think that comes from love too, is because what would make you want to withstand all of these things? It's wanting to take care of others and take care of yourself. And so that's a driver towards wanting to collect information that's towards living a better life, creating a better world.
Really good. That's inspiring. Do thoughts create emotions?
Thoughts do create emotions, for sure, because whatever you can be steered in all sorts of different directions of where your mind is at, and it can be on the person that cut you off, and you could be thinking about that all day, and that's going to steer your emotions, or it can be on an infinite number of other things, which would cause other emotions to come up.
Yeah. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I don't know. I'd have to find out the root of thinking, which I haven't thought enough about or learned enough about.
Yeah. No, that's good. And realize saying, I don't know, that's totally valid. That's not that I'm expecting you to know the answers, and you don't have to feel bad to say that. So I appreciate you just saying, I don't know. Fill in the blank, Noreen. I don't know what I think until I
breathe.
Oh my God, that's my favorite thing on earth is breathing. I've never had that answer. Do you do yoga?
No, I need to follow this advice more, but it just seemed like the right answer.
Breathing is something that is a big metaphor in all our studies, because we are on automatic pilot breathing. But how many times a day do you consciously take a breath? That's sort of what humans are able to do, but don't do.
Right.
And that's sort of what yoga is being conscious of your breath for a couple, moments of the day.
Yeah, and breath can be metaphorical to all the times that you have to just pause in the day, and that's been a conversation that's been coming up a lot for me lately on just how to pause and rest, and breathing is a reminder of stopping and the value of stopping, and meditation and yoga can do that too.
Yeah, pause. That's good. Can humans think without language?
Yes, I think it depends on, it depends on what, in the broad spectrum of what language is. If it's any kind of form of communication, I think that you need that to be able to build concepts. But I think that language can look like a lot more than traditional verbal rhetoric.
Yeah. Chomsky says that a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. How do you cope when language breaks down? Noreen, what do you do when language doesn't work?
I think you have to go deeper into it. So it's, you know, when there's language barriers, I don't think the problem is really that there's language breakdown. It's knowing, it's acknowledging and naming that it's when those breakdowns happen, because I think that they happen a lot more. Like, people can realize it when they're speaking two different languages. It's a lot clearer to know when there's a language breakdown. But when two people speak the same language, for example, like this dialogue, if you know you're meaning something completely different and I'm going in some other direction and we don't know that's happening, and that continues to go on, there's more of a need to be able to probe questions that get towards understanding that there's a miscommunication happening, I guess. So I think it's, I'm veering a little bit, but meaning to all say there's that more probing questions are kind of just a natural part of language and communication, and towards building stronger communication. So it's asking questions, and it's trying to make sure that you humbly understand and don't assume that you understand, or skip acting like you understand when you don't, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. It really touches again on completely our studies on this podcast and all my podcasts is probing new questions.
Yeah.
So if language breaks down, then we're going to probe new questions. Your observations of humans in general, I know it's both and it depends. Are humans more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think it depends on the person. There's many people who are very feeling based, and then there's others who are in their head. I would say I'm someone who's a lot more in my head than feeling based, but then I know other people who are the other way around, and then we're all kind of learning how to balance that wherever we are in it.
Yeah. These are two questions Alan Turing asked in 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Thinking, if it's saying there's some kind of communication, that if it's giving language to the soul, then yeah, because it helps us understand more of what it's giving us language and understanding and insight towards what our soul is and other souls are, and how they connect. And so yeah, I would say, yeah, if thinking as a form of some language for the soul.
His other question was, can machines think?
Like an AI technology?
Well, you can put it in that context. I mean, yeah, it's how you define what machines are, you know.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, thinking is just consciousness, and that consciousness seems to be in a lot of places that we wouldn't expect, and it's hard to really know where it can exist, but I'm assuming it's a lot more than we might know.
Well, you must have ESP, Noreen, because the next question is, does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're just detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
It's probably some form of both, but I feel like it's a lot more of the detection side of it. It makes me think of if the tree falls down and nobody hears it, did it make that sound? And it's, if you believe everything's waves, then my dad talks about this a lot. It's like, yeah, if there's waves coming out of that, then that's still sound, even if you decipher it as something else or you're not there to access it. So, if we're these kind of there's these boxes on our heads, or our heads are these boxes where we're just taking in information. We're just taking in waves of information. Then we're just something that's connected to it. It's all just a connection of waves, a string of that. So I would say we're observing it in that it's something that we're just connected to. And then it's mostly that, but then we do have some kind of capacity to manipulate it through our own experience.
I like that. I've heard Alan Watts talk about waves also, and people bring up particles and waves and particles. And Frank Zappa liked to blend it, and he called it a wavicle. Well, we'll get more into that. And do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
That's hard, because I'm like, one kind of leads to the other, but I think ultimately it's probably happiness is the thing. That's the part that brings you joy, but you find that through meaning.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Speed of light. I don't know.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer, another poet, said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
Anything that's a tool towards greater communication. So, and I don't know, because I believe there's enough resources in the world that exist. So because of that, I'm like, if we could find a way to communicate that's true. I don't, you know what? Yeah, I don't know. I'd say anything that's like, my immediate thought is anything that would jump towards creating greater empathy towards, but I don't feel like I have a good answer for that.
Well, creating greater empathy is a great answer, but it's like interesting because let's just probe this a second. On CBS Sunday Morning had a great 8-minute segment on Facebook today on how, and they had these professional communication specialists saying how they're dealing with disinformation. So, we've used spoken word, we've used printed word, and we've used electronic word to misinform people. And what humans have done was developed critical thinking skills to weed through what they think is more true and what may be false. So if someone said, "What new tool do you suggest?" and they said social media, how would you respond? In your answer, in creating greater empathy.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's how you use it, and that's an example of something that has the capacity to make really powerful changes that are positive, but then also equally negative. But yeah, it's how you use it, because I think that the intended goal and effort is towards creating progress, and so if you can have that, yeah. So it's I don't know if it's so much about the tool; it's about how the tools are used.
yeah.
And if the tools are used towards creating greater empathy and towards compassion ultimately. And I guess it's hard. Yeah, I mean, it helps you're giving this scenario of social media, because I think yeah, it's such a strange one, because it does create so much connection, and our ability to do this right now and have these kinds of conversations, but then it's allowing people to also have this anonymity where they can be so much more toxic. And so it's how do you use that tool towards helping people understand that they still their actions still matter, and the way that they treat others still matter, and how they use these tools.
Really good, because you're an exception to most of the people I've interviewed over the last, since COVID started. I would say 80-90% of them I never met in person. We actually met in person 3 blocks from my house.
I know.
This seems more intimate than when we met in person, because
Right.
we were in an environment and our heads are turning and seeing what the environment is.
Right.
And I've been astounded by these Zoom, the capability of Zoom or whatever platform we're using. In this case, the StreamYard, and it's my events for 35 years have been about people sitting in a room and talking, exchanging eye contact and verbal exchange. My events for the last year and a half are been better than the 30-40 years I've been doing it live. And people go, "That's horrible." And I go, I'm sorry, people are more attentive, and they're nicer. There's more empathy in these situations. So it's funny, because I think people closer to my age, 60 and above, we sort of are leery on how social media has changed us. And then Facebook became a platform for grandparents. It used to be for kids, but it is. Why do you think people are so panicky? I mean, tell me, in your age group, do people think, oh, social media is bad, I'm quitting Facebook? Or do they all just engage in it and use it for what it's capable of and don't let the disservices drag them down? Like, just suss out that services, disservices thing.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it also varies with, even like, I'm 34, and I feel like in people I know in their 20s and 30s, there's a whole range of different sentiments on social media. But the central thing of the frustrations of what's artificial on there and that people are putting up something artificial, like that's something that you'll hear a lot. But people who want to quit Facebook or quit social media because it causes a lot of strain. But then I also know other people who are kind of where I am on it, where it's kind of, I don't use it until I need to use it. And then so a lot of these, and it's not, there's ways to kind of disconnect with it too. And I know that for elder folks too, some who use a lot of social media and others who don't. And I think there's just different preferences with how you get connected to it. And there are different levels of addiction to it as well. So yeah, I think there's a range, but the general sentiment of in that range being either it's something that's really toxic, and you'll hear more of the negative pieces to it, but there's still also, I think maybe we don't talk about the value as much either, because, and it's a hard piece with it where it, I have friends who have built their careers around social media and were able to become successful because of this resource that otherwise wouldn't have made it to a lot of places and communities where social media is helping bring up people who wouldn't have otherwise had those opportunities. So that's also something. Yeah, it's the range of all of that.
Yeah. In other words, you see the big picture. That's we call, if you study the pattern recognition, you get comprehensive awareness. It just seems as though people seem to be, we're in big trouble, climate change and social media and this and that. And I mean, it's like, haven't humans always had problems? And it's how you deal with them.
Yeah.
But do you feel we are in a worse situation than since the beginning of humans?
No, because there's more potential now, and there's progress because of everything that we've learned up until this point, and now we have access to all of this information and resources where you can learn about, like, a library of information that's becoming more and more accessible to people, and we have to make sure that it's equitably accessible. But I mean, it's complicated because it's like it's having to navigate some things that have never happened before, which is people have more variables and more things coming at them on a day-to-day basis than ever before. And it's like there was the Industrial Revolution, which caused that to rapidly change. And now we're at this next phase where it's people are on their phones, they're looking at different things and are not even conscious of how many things they're unconscious of, because we have so much coming at us. We don't even realize when some of the information that we're accessing without even thinking about it. So when that's happening, it's like when we're talking about mental health and all of, like, the chaos that people are in, like, a lot of people are not in a good state because of how much they're overloaded. And so while that's a negative thing and there's a lot to be frustrated about with that, it's also something that's creating this next process where it's when you realize you're overloaded, you can find a way to find new solutions and connection and harmony, which is hopefully what is going to be the next phase of something like what we are experiencing right now, and going towards a reality that's not like what it was before, where a lot of people go, I wish we could go back to normal, but something that's actually cohesive and actually recognizes how to value everybody. And we're living we're not in the worst of times. We're growing towards being far more compassionate and empathetic than ever before. And but at the same time, it's this weird duality that you have to hold at the same time, where it's like we're still living in a place where even in Venice, slavery exists in all forms. In LA, in all forms, slavery exists. And we have to also, like, acknowledge all of that in whole space, for we live in the best of times, but we also have that going on, and prison systems that look like slavery. And so it's figuring out how to go we also have the most resources we ever have. Living in a city like this, especially, we have the most potential for putting together all of the different kinds of resources that have access to information and videography and the arts and technology and all of these creative ideas and thinkers, and you can put that all together and come up with the best of what people have ever had. And that happens, but we have to do it at a far greater level than ever before.
Really well put. Thank you so much. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
A lot of things. I think the homelessness crisis out here is on my mind a lot, and yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a lot about just I'm learning how to think less about some of the really stressful things that are happening societally, but I think trying to find solutions to some of the treatment of people in our world is something that can make me stress out.
Yeah. Well, we got to talk about that a lot, because I have a lot of friends on the boardwalk who have been homeless, living there for 20 years. And I really know at deeper level, it sort of leads into this question. Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. Like, we don't really know how social media shapes our behavior. We just sort of embrace it and use it as a tool, and that's all good. But everything's changed us deeper than the intention of the invention. So cars changed us more than just giving us this way to get from point A to point B faster. And so McLuhan was frustrated, and he probed all his question making, like you probe questions, was saying, well, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions when we can turn to the artists to reveal a lot of them to us, to reveal this, and then we can cope with what we don't like? So why do you think humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though artists are, meaning poets, filmmakers, whoever, are revealing these hidden psychic effects?
I feel like there's this push-pull between structure and like something that has less structure to it. But I think we're all brought up into conditioning and upbringings that teach us structure, and our school systems focus on something that's a lot further from the arts, which I feel like is kind of a traditional answer to this. We don't put enough attention into the arts in the way that we teach people. But I think it does stem to that piece of it where they're not the parts that we value. We don't, and you can see it through the way that we spend. And well, I guess we do have artists who, once they reach a certain level, can get that kind of value. But it's, I think the formlessness, I think we're so quantitative that, when we are looking for numbers and quantity, and we're looking at patterns that can give us quantifiable data. And you don't really get that with the arts. And a lot of things that are its value are really hard to measure. And even though those things, what poets and artists and a lot of creatives are able to bring into those traditional structures, which I think need to be a much bigger part in government and in law, and a lot of the traditional structures that we have that don't really allow for more flexibility and creativity, because they've just become so giant that no one person feels like they can really control it. So we see that in government and policymakers and a lot of traditional careers where there's just union and anything that has like unions or police and all of these different forms where that's the way that it was done, and so they don't really want to change it dramatically, and it comes from different reasons for it. But I think that it's almost too big for people to change. That's why I think it continues to perpetuate in this way, and it kind of siphons out the creativity, and there's no place to kind of figure out how to make sure that you kind of stop and assess and break things down using artists and all of these kinds of people who would really be a lot more valuable in those spaces than we give credit for. And it's continued to go on this way where it's just more and more polarized, I think. And a lot of the artists and creatives have stereotypes that exist since before anyone was born who's here right now. I don't know. So,
well, that was really articulate. You're really good with words and you're communicating a lot to me. I appreciate it. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I would say the earliest one was, I think I might remember something from before I was born, but which was just like something that was just white, and I was communicating with somebody. So maybe that's the earliest one, unless there's a hallucination. Otherwise, I remember I have I think it's because of a picture that I remember when I saw the house that my family had moved into when I was 1, and they were looking at the house, and I can vaguely remember that, but then my memories don't really come into bigger form until I was 4 or 5.
What city or town was that?
That was Gaithersburg, Maryland. So that's outside of DC. It's a suburb of DC.
Yeah. Do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
More blessing, but it depends on the life that you've lived.
Yeah.
It's more of a blessing for me. But.
Noreen, tell me an early role model or someone who had an impact on you within your immediate family, and then the second part is outside your immediate family. Just briefly, what was that impact?
See, it's hard. I have 2 older sisters, and my parents were first generation Pakistani, but I can't pick just one of them, because I always say I'm kind of the semblance of all 4 members of my immediate family. My parents and my sisters all kind of created who I am and my identity.
Well, just give me through like each one, like one trait you sort of emulate from each one, or something you learn from each one.
I've thought about this, and then so the person I was going to mention, my dad is the one who I've taken the closest like career path through, who worked at the World Bank for 20 years and really cares about microfinance and very oriented on career oriented. So I think I took a lot of that from my dad, and this understanding of diplomacy and how to use service in a career and public service through a career. And I'd say, so I've learned that from him, and he's a lot more science, like he cares a lot more about history and science and logic. And then my mom they're good. It's symbiotic because she's an artist. And so from her, I've learned a lot more on creativity. And she's also somebody who's taught me a lot on how to communicate and is a lot more honest about her feelings and can articulate that. So I've learned a lot of communication from her. And then my 2 older sisters, one of them, my eldest sister, Shazi, I've learned a lot about how to just have fun from her, because she's just always had this natural ability to be someone who laughs a lot and is able to just kind of live life more carefree and just enjoy things. And so I've learned a lot of how to just live. She lived in California before I did, and I just fell in love with this place and in Venice. And then my other sister, I've just learned a lot on how to just be, and gotten a lot of wisdom from my other sister on just how to be. She's given me a lot on maturity and processing myself. So,
what a great summation! Thank you. I want to meet all of them. So, outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you growing up, and what was that? Just briefly.
I'd say, I don't know, the first person that comes to mind, my best friend, Erica. Growing up, we met when we were 15, and that friendship has taught a lot. And I think it's been the process through our friendship, because it's, somebody who's gone through a lot of loss, gone through a lot of hardship, and through that friendship just learned a lot about how to support other people, and then also just how that comes back to you. And it's, I guess, just learned how to, just a lot on friendship from that.
Yeah. And you're still in touch with her?
Yeah. And I've built other friendships that are like that, I think, through understanding that one.
Beautiful. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
I was raised Muslim, but then they had me go to Catholic school.
And are you still practicing in either? Did you ever check out, or?
I am still, I would call myself, I was raised Muslim, and I still would say it's still part of my identity. But I I don't really, I'm more, I would say I'm more spiritual than anything. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you pray?
Different forms of prayer, but
Yeah.
communication to a higher power. Yes.
If God exists, what would you like God to tell you after you die?
That give me the understanding of why people suffering or life the suffering and the complexity of the world is okay. I would like more comprehension on why it exists like it does in our world.
Yeah, it's like, dude, how can you rationale suffering? That's a good question. It's like,
You're helping me form it.
do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know where the root of evil comes. It feels like it's something that's beyond the individuals who do it, but then it's hard to cut off what is. It's almost like we're talking about the waves. Where do you cut it? Where does it belong to that person, and where does it belong to the root that came and turned them into the devil? I don't know. Maybe it's both. I just don't know.
It's all right. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? This one I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you, Noreen, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I guess it depends on the context, because there's certain times where it matters to not acknowledge your enemy. So if your enemy is something that's it's all consuming, and your day is going to be filled with being angry at your enemy, then that's something that's not really worth your time and that's not valuable, and you've given power to them. But then there's other enemies where it's like, if somebody is secretly slashing your tire every week and you don't know who's doing that, and you're not acknowledging your enemy, and your enemy continues to do something that's destructive to you, then you're still empowering them. So I think it just depends on, you have to pick your battles. Like, you have to pick your enemies, the ones that need attention, and how does that attention look, and how do you there's a lot of complexity in how you would handle an enemy, but I think observation is important sometimes, because there's a lot of people who want to just go get hands up, like carefree, like, and for Alan Watts, I love Alan Watts, but he's also a white man who's telling us this, and so his experience in the world is going to be that it's like, it's a lot easier to go, like, it's fine, like, throw your hands up to your enemy and walk away. But then for a lot of people, that means continued oppression for them and everyone around them. So yeah,
it's a true phenomenon. The dude was a womanizer and an alcoholic, and he turned the Western culture onto Eastern philosophy, but he was a Western dude.
I know, that's why I listen to so much of him and I love him, but part of me is always like, well, can't I figure out how to get this information from somebody direct? Because he's translating to me too, but I could go further. And
yeah. But then when you listen to Christian Murdy, he's like, don't listen to me. I don't know anything, which is actually more. And I mean, Alan Watts, they both say that. They're like, anyways, Alan Watts always says, I'm just an entertainer. Don't take me serious.
But he's helping people.
No, I think it's important.
It's
I've listened to him for like 30 years every Sunday morning, and it's changed me. I like it.
Right.
James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago in a movie theater he ran, Volta Cinema. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
That's a good question. Well, it's storytelling. So all of those theater and film and all of those, they're a form of storytelling, which is one of the oldest pieces of human connection and communication is storytelling. And what it does maybe differently than just living your life is you get to live it out from another person's experience and see it in this perspective that you can't see when you're living your own life and going through it and having to take on all these other things that take your attention. But I think there's also in the way that you tell these stories, it goes back to the arts, which is something that touches on people's emotions. So they're told in this way that can capture people and stick a lot more powerfully than if you weren't being told through these forms. And music can do that too. It sticks in memory, and like films can do, or certain things that can capture people. And so that can change really powerful paradigms in a way that wouldn't happen if you're just living your life. And we're living as a society, so those kinds of things matter if we're trying to have really captivating storytelling that helps impact an entire group of people in a collective.
Really good. And so we're going to talk about your pursuits in, your career route, like where you went. But first, we didn't get to talk. Are you someone who's played music, write poetry, done dance? Is there any of the arts that you've pursued yourself?
Yeah, I write poetry. And that's been one of my forms of, artistic,
Pursuit, yeah.
So yeah, it's a poetry, and then I play music too. I used to play bass guitar, and now I play harmonica, and so those are probably the central ones.
Good. So that helps me. So let's go one at a time. Let's stay on poetry for a second. What attracted you to write poetry? You're growing up. Are your parents reading poetry to you? Are you picking it up on your own? Are you hearing it at school? Like, just what's your route on going, I can do that?
Yeah, I think, well, I when I originally think about it, I'm like, I've been writing it since elementary school. And so I think it came from school. Even like my parents too are read to us and value poetry, but I don't think that it really came from there. I think I remember a lot of classes where that would resonate with me the most, and loving Langston Hughes and some other poets where it would just stick to me more than a lot of other kind of literature did. So I don't know. And that's the same thing with the harmonica too. It's these things that is just like, I don't even know when. It was just kind of like, that's the thing that I want to do. And if you're just kind of letting go and listening to yourself, you go like, you find something, you go like, I want to try that. And so that came up with those. And then And then with instruments, I've gone through a few different instruments, and there's these feelings of, I played bass guitar for 10 years, and I just realized I was like, wait, like my fingers aren't any stronger, and it's not that comfortable to play, and it's actually, I don't resonate with it that much, and like, it's time to let this instrument go. And then I picked something that's kind of the opposite, and it's like this tiny instrument, but it's just picking.
But let's stay on bass for a second. Who did you hear bass guitar wise, or what genre?
A lot of started with 90s rock music is where, like, I think it evolved from there, and there's a lot of different directions it went, but that was kind of the root of it. My sister listened to a lot of Nirvana, and so like my earliest bass lines are those, and Sublime songs.
Yeah, Sublime and Nirvana. Yeah. How cool. But then do you know who you heard harmonica wise? Was it blues harmonica or?
Yeah, but I picked that up because I was going to the Peace Corps about 10 years ago, and I just needed an instrument that was small enough to travel with. And then, so it wasn't really inspiration from hearing specific artists, but it was more just the convenience of that. And then it's like, and now it's just a fun instrument.
Well, the convenience of it small, because I used to hitchhike. I hitchhiked across America twice in 70 and 71. And it's like, when you're sitting on the side of a road waiting for a car to pick you up, not an Uber.
Yeah.
From you sticking your thumb out, the harmonica is the greatest instrument because it's in your pocket.
I don't understand why it's not more popular, because it's cost effective. It's a lot cheaper than most instruments. And then it's tiny. And then it doesn't take that long to learn. Or to learn like some songs. So it surprises me that like everybody doesn't play it, but it's awesome because it's, especially now living in Venice, where there's people playing all the time. And so always, I tend to always have a harmonica on me just in case there's an opportunity to play with people.
Because the street performer's playing, you can just jam with them.
Yeah,
well, that's beautiful. Now, that was the perfect lead in. Your ESP's really bubbling away. What attracted you to pursue the Peace Corps? I mean, you're in college. What are you studying? And then what's the route you said, oh, I want to do Peace Corps?
Yeah, I mean, it started in a very different direction. When I started, I went to Boston University 2005 to 2009, and started with thinking I was going to go into music business, which I was really passionate about, but music was all that mattered to me from growing up, and I thought that's the direction that I would go. And at some point, I don't know if it was the classes that I took, there was one that was just kind of stepping back and listening to myself again, and suddenly I was like, I want to take communications, and I went into public relations, but then also took some sociology classes. And there was something that just shifted in my consciousness where it was wanting to figure out a way to just be a public servant. And that shifted there. And then learning that the Peace Corps during that time was something that I wasn't sure I would do right after I graduated, but then it kind of just fell into being the next best step. And then so, I mean, it's an interesting time. We're going through a recession. There's a lot of that. So I don't remember what the key thing was, but I wanted to travel. It was everything that I wanted to do. It was the ability to serve, the ability to travel, connect with other communities, and do it in this way where it's sustainable and they support you going there. And like we have a system that has an entire program for that. So yeah, it kind of just everything checked off at the time. And
yeah,
so,
that's amazing. Yeah. So you mean means the American government has a system called the Peace Corps. Is that what you meant by the we?
Yeah, which I don't like using that we because it excludes a lot of people. Yeah, but I at the same time the whole time I was there, just I complain a lot about government, and then I have to remember there's a lot of ways where infinite ways where it's creating impact and value, and I got to do a program like that because.
No, I really respect you. I've always looked up to people, because I was around when I think the Peace Corps started. Wasn't it started by JFK or somebody?
Yeah, 63.
63, wow. So just back to the music business, what part, when you were saying, I want to go in the music business, there's a great interview with Frank Zappa, by the way, on Dinah Shore, where she goes, well, what do you think of the music business? He goes, well, the important word there is business. They don't care about the music, and I mean, he was telling the truth, and he was knee deep in the music business.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, what were you're playing bass and you go, I want to go in the music business. You mean you want to be an A&R person? You want to be a manager? You want to be a performer? What did music business mean when you said that?
I think A&R rep was what I was thinking of, and just anybody that's getting to select artists. And I don't remember, I just knew I wanted to be near music in some way. And I had jobs like that where it was promoting for artists in Boston. And
right.
And yeah, but I remember thinking A&R rep was where I was going to go with it. And we went on these trips to New York through our school where that was we're meeting with executives in New York. I think it was like Atlantic and Columbia and a few others, and meeting the A&R reps too. And I remember one of them said something about, he had signed Simple Plan and Porcupine Trees. And he was like, it's like baseball where it's, even if you get 2 and 10, you're still considered one of the best. And I think that's what he had, where it's just the chances of even getting 2 out of that means that you're really good at what you do. But what came through with all of them is like, they don't know what they're doing. This industry is dying, and they're all trying to find a way to continue to sustain it. And that's what was coming across to me. And I just was like, I don't feel good in these spaces. This doesn't feel like it matters. And so I appreciate you asking that, because that also really shifted it towards being like, I want to go towards something that's public service. But it's funny because it's all coming back together now with some of the, because I think, music has such it's the arts and all of those things that have so much impact in public service too. But at the time, it makes sense.
It's a beautiful through line that you told me. And I'm sorry to bring up Zappa again, but he said this funny thing. He said, in the 60s, they'd go to they would send the demo in the record executive would be chomping on a cigar, and they go, what do you think? Should we put this out? And he goes, give it to Joey in the mailroom and tell us if it's any good. Like the young kid in the business would tell the old guy who to sign. And then the music business became, oh, send it to the accounting department and tell us what demographics would buy it. So that's a perfect example, is when Nirvana broke through, they did something a little different. They sort of, I don't know if you want to say, they sort of softened punk a little or made it a little more accessible. And then all the A&R guys go find me a new Nirvana.
Right.
That's all, so it is it's a fun business. I've been in it for years and in the fringes, but it's fun to hear that, because I was there when Dylan's singing, Masters of War, helping us raise our consciousness about passive, anti-war movement. And you ask Dylan, he goes, "Don't blame me." He's just making it's like back to poetry. I'm curious, is what's the function of poetry?
Maybe poetry within itself. I mean, it's different for different people. So, I mean, for some people, it might just be that, just the act of writing and putting words towards some kind of emotion, whether or not that's shared with others, even just putting that out and creating that has value. So it can be as simple as that, but then it can also be used towards any kind of messaging that is going to help steer whatever emotions that you want to bring for other people. And maybe even not. It's because I think poetry is interesting because it can be, however it's written really is going to be reflected differently to how other people receive it. And that's true for every kind of writing, but I think poetry more than any, because it's really so complex and requires a person's mind to kind of fill in the meaning. But yeah.
You nailed it, because when you mentioned Langston Hughes, of all the poets you could mention, I mean, that guy is
favorite. Yeah.
Human. And you also, I'm a big fan of the symbolist, and Leo Bersani made a study of Mallarmé, and he said the very crisis which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition, which I think is exactly what you just said. And I'm always trying to figure out what that means. But I think you might resonate with what Gary Snyder said. My task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then bringing that seeing into language.
Right.
So when you're writing poetry, I'm curious of the role intention plays in your creative process. Now, I'll set it up this way. Screenwriting teacher told me great art or great poem is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film or great poet is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process writing a poem?
Not much, I don't think. Well, no, that's not true. Because actually, I think a lot of the poetry that I've written when I'm older has been more with some kind of message. And I have a blog that's really just focused on peace. And so all the poems have some kind of theme that's towards greater understanding of others. So, and I think a lot of times I've realized that they start with the idea first, and the poems that I'm prouder of, the idea is first, and then the creation is afterwards. And there's these different phases with it. But the first is usually there's some kind of message that I want to push through that's on something that I think is important and I want to share. And then it goes into this next layer of trying to unfold and create that. And that takes being in the right space for it, being okay with there being phases and layers of the writing, trying to just read through it regularly, because there's rhythm that matters with poetry that doesn't necessarily matter with other kinds of things. And it's that flow. So reading through it and polishing it, but it's those phases, but it starts with the message and then trying to formulate it into something that sounds good. And that almost feels like a process of having something come through to you, and channeling towards some like higher focus or whatever. People have different ways of what they think that is, but whatever puts you into that flow of focus is the next step then towards creating something that sounds good. But
well done, because Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
I've started to think more about the reader, and it's really, I mean, the readers are usually me and a few people who might like it on on a blog, and I don't put a lot of effort on trying to get it out. So, but I do think about the reader, and it takes different forms. It's also, you know, like I want to public speak in the future, and so I think like I use it sometimes towards getting some of the ideas that I want to then later put into that, or will share out in the form of these poems through social media later on. So even though I know that at the present it's not being used towards this audience that it's intended for, it's still getting created in that kind of mindset. And then the intention is still there. That's towards, this could maybe provide something of value to say.
Beautiful.
To somebody.
Do artists, poets, filmmakers have a moral obligation?
I would say so, especially as they reach a greater audience and have connection to them, because their actions influence others, whether or not they like that or not. That's still something that exists, and that's a hard thing to take on. But there's certain pieces that you're building yourself into a role of leadership, and if you're in a role of leadership, that means obligation towards how you act, and recognizing that your actions are being modeled by others and influence how they act. So there is an expectation that you have to be acting in a way that's integral.
Yeah. So a couple of my heroes are experimental film people. George Manupelli says his mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says I'm just a vehicle and this just comes through me. So you sort of talked about this being a vessel. Is art making, poetry making more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology or culture is dominant?
I think it's really both, and that's something that I've learned more recently. And it's because it can feel like it's, when people talk about having something channeled to them and it comes through, it almost devalues who it's coming through, because it just seems like you're like, okay, I just like pulled my brain open and now this information's coming through and I'm just typing it. I happen to have a keyboard, so I typed it up like an angel that whispered in my ear, and I like wrote a Bible on it. But like, I don't think it's that. I think there's the people who have that open to them. It's because they've worked towards becoming that. And so that requires your own capacity to think at a level that would have you open enough to have that come through, and your own intentions. And so I think it's very much both. To be able to be open like that requires your own work, self work, and effort towards self-improvement and whatever you're. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Missy Elliott said she learned how to sing from car alarms.
That's awesome.
Yes. But it's not all that. And what you also said really evoked, the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And so can art making or poetry making be egoless?
It depends on how you define the ego in there. But I think it can be done with a lot less ego than, I don't know.
T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Like what do I speak to myself in English?
Yeah, or like what form is your inner consciousness in? I mean, when people say English, then I go, well, what form is your inner consciousness in? So it's like, yeah, there's something going on inside your head. Call it a dialogue. It's sort of like, what language or form is that in?
Right. It's in words, and far too many words right now.
I know about that. What was the motive of the cave artist?
Oh, I didn't get to ask them, but there's something, whatever's making any kind of artist go, I have to put this out. I don't know, an internal guiding system that's driving.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I think my server has been messing up for a couple of days, so I apologize.
No worries.
But we're still rolling, so I like that. I said, what was the motive of the cave artist? And you said, I wasn't able to ask them. But I mean, just in general, what's your hunch?
Yeah, I think it's some kind of internal driver that inspires any artist to want to put out whatever emotion is in them that they are needing to manifest externally.
Yeah. And Noreen, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Could you say that again?
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Or conviction or compromise? I'd say probably compromise, because it still involves conviction, but it involves the next step of conviction, which is knowing how to integrate it into people, the connections that you have with others around you, collaboration.
There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. Thank you. Yes. Is perception reality?
It's one form of reality, but it's only a slice to a greater reality.
Yeah. Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah, I think so. The world seems pretty impossible on a day-to-day basis, and more so. So just believing in anything feels impossible. I don't know.
Wow.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Sun Ra, the great jazz shaman, said, the impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change.
That's very true.
Now, your pursuit as an activist, after the Peace Corps, maybe you can talk about that and what exactly your pursuit is now. Like, I tried to get you to say, oh, I'm a social worker. And you go, well, I'm not a social worker, but tell us what your pursuit is now. And sort of, did that come out of the social work and all your background? I mean, you sort of walked us through it a little, from pursuing music business, going to the Peace Corps, then your next step of like what you're currently doing.
Yeah, it's been it's hard to put terms to. I feel like public servant is always, if I could think of one label, I'm like, public servant might say it best, because I just want to serve disenfranchised communities and uplift. But yeah, I mean, so coming back from the Peace Corps, I lived in Baltimore and worked at a nonprofit there, and then went into Americorps after that. So Americorps is a program that's kind of like the domestic Peace Corps, and you do service for a community. It's similar to the way that you would in Peace Corps, though there's a lot of different structural pieces to it. And so I worked for a program in Denver, which then got me into becoming a case manager. And so that was my first experience with social work, was through that, and working with youth, like young adults, transition ages 18 to 24. And it's continuously been just trying to find a way to be of service that has kind of narrowed more and more that I want to work with. I'm still trying to figure, it's still kind of a fluid process, because I went through that, and through being in this case management role, realized I want to work on policy, because what's happening, the kinds of resources that exist in this for case managers or anybody, like the resources are just, there's something that's deeply dysfunctional in the way that services are flowing. So it got me into going into a master's program in public policy at UCLA. And so I did a program from there from 2018 to 2020, and worked on a project that was on labor trafficking, and then also learned a lot more about homelessness in LA, which is where I want to centrally focus on trying to figure out some, like, working on service and efforts towards how to create better pipelines towards housing, but then also addressing some of the more immediate issues that I see, which is the misperceptions that people have about unhoused people, and the way that people are talking to each other, and the divisiveness of those issues. But going through those programs, I continued again in social work, but it's I don't know. It's not my, I don't know which hat to wear first. And not until coming out to Venice this past year have I ever been called an activist, which is a hat that I have such a respect for activists, but it's strange. I still don't feel like it's the hat that fully fits where I am with things. I'm not really sure, but it's generally, it's been an ongoing process of trying to figure out ways of serving and.
Yeah.
And
I love your aspirations to be a public servant, and everything you articulated there was good because, it was our mutual friend Martha who introduced me to you. And when I saw her yesterday, I goes, well, I'm not sure what her pursuit is. And she goes, activist. And I thought that was good. And I understand just words are so important. That's really what we study in all our sessions is words. And, I really want to talk to you sometime about all my homeless friends for 40 years on Venice Boardwalk, because it's a deeper knowledge I've acquired than what you read in newspapers or college studies or all these sources. And, it's difficult to explain it, but we were calling, at one point some of them we were saying, say houseless, not homeless, because the earth is everyone's home. And you say, unhoused or houseless people. And one of the homeless activists, a wonderful woman, she said, nope, I want to be called homeless because that's the brand that registers with people. If you say houseless, they go, I don't know what you're talking about. Homeless people means this. So again, it's pigeonholing, but it's also in the music business. If you go into the record store and you go, I want this band, and they go, well, what genre is it? Well, they're crossover. Well, what is that? What category do they put them in? Reggae or punk or what? So then at least where to find them. So words have services and disservices, but it's again like T.S. Eliot, the poet, says, when I talk to you, I got to use words.
Yeah, it's complex because I'm thinking about why I use unhoused so much more than I use homeless, and it's because somebody had told me a while back that when they were on the streets that word helped them feel like it was less something that was describing them as a whole, and it was something that's just an attribute, and that's really powerful there. So it's almost, I think the words you use really have to do with respect, and it's what's going to respect. If most people are triggered by a certain word, I'm not going to want to use that. So, and it just depends on, that's whatever's going to make them feel respected and dignified and heard. So it comes from that. But then there's, terms like activism, it's different. I almost don't want to use it for there's different reasons why, because even though I respect so many activists, it's almost, it's a pragmatic, like just in a practical sense, is thinking of, trying to reach people on the other side of this issue. And a lot of them, they hear the word activism, and they've already decided a lot of things about those people. I was actually really surprised to learn what people associate with the label activism, who are people who are on a lot of local issues that are the kind of stereotypes that exist with it. So it doesn't seem practical to use the term activist in a lot of times, but then it's like, do you use certain terms in certain spaces? And, but we do need labels to define a certain group of people. And if their actions are wrong too, they still sometimes deserve those labels for being a part of something that's negative, even if they don't want to be called that. But I agree with I'm saying all that just to say I agree with the importance of labels and the value of what they can mean, because they can mean so many different things to people.
It's like we say, they have services and disservices.
Yeah.
And it's not to say good and bad.
Right.
It says, because you can flip a disservice into a service.
Right.
But what you said was respect is such an amazing word, because I'm always promoting just acknowledging another person when you're walking down the street. And Michael Ventura wrote something in the LA Weekly years ago that I will never forget. He says, one of the best things you can do for a homeless person is look them in the eye. And it's like, how many people, they'll drop a $5 bill to someone, but they won't even look them in the eye. Like, that's a powerful thing, to look someone in the eye and say hello, here, I want to help you.
Right.
Eye contact, and back to your word empathy. So tell me, Noreen, since you've sort of pursued this through Peace Corps, American Corps, and public service, tell me one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
That's a great, I don't think I've been asked that. So I think the element that stayed the same is more emphasis and understanding that there's a pattern that it's helped me understand more about every community of people. Is you can find connection with people everywhere. That's I guess that's what I've learned is through all those experiences.
Yeah.
You can go to West Africa, you can go to a local community that's near you, and no matter where you go, there's still some of the same basic elements of how you connect to people. And it's funny you say look them in the eye, because even though that might not be one of them, because there's certain communities in the world where eye contact is frowned upon, but in another way, there's certain things that are universal towards everybody, which is how to go into a conversation without assuming things about them is probably going to mean you have a better conversation with people, and trying to just be genuine, authentic can have a huge impact on how you connect with others. And having just general compassion exists everywhere, and if you treat people with that, then it can be shown to you. And so I've learned a lot about that in my work. I'd say with the Peace Corps, there's a lot of lessons that I learned with development, and development can take a lot of forms and mean a lot of different things, especially in local communities. But I have a much better understanding about how to step back in any kind of work that you do, and recognize that you're trying to uplift others. So whenever you go into a space that's not a space where that's your own, I don't know, like a full, something that doesn't belong to you, there's an importance in finding leaders from those communities and understanding that it's about uplifting them, and it's not about doing the direct work. And I think that's something that's just carried through, where it's always been in everything that I do is try to find leadership in others, and not to try to just create.
Yeah.
But it's not just about just trying to create that like in a, what is it, like and not just trying to go in and be the imperialist in anything that you do. So I think that's carried through, and it continues to be important. It continues to be something that I thought that I would see a lot more in different places that I'm in, but you see it happen, I think, because of time, and when people are running on a clock, and it makes you have to put together projects more quickly, that element can be lost about building leadership from the people who you're trying to serve. And that's just been an important piece. And I guess the parts that have varied the most, I don't know, life has just varied a lot. And I think the way that my perspectives on the world, and what the meaning of work, and what work looks like for me, and knowing how to slow down, and recognizing that sometimes you can come up with better solutions, not going in this rat race. That's something that, it's funny because I learned that in Peace Corps, but I was 22, 23 at the time, and hadn't been in the work world yet. So, it wasn't conditioned yet to the level that you can kind of be on this running clock. And so have gotten into that, and then kind of learned how to unwrap that being out in Venice and LA, and understanding that it doesn't work to be operating on this times and the structure, as many of us are getting to learn, if we have the privilege to, in the past year.
Yeah. Fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when
you learn how to tame it and turn it into something constructive. So, I mean, anger is going to exist with, like, it's not about just not having anger. It's about knowing what to do with anger in a way that allows you to come up with solutions, and to not have it go towards something that is actually more dangerous and detrimental.
What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
I don't know. But there's no one trait. I would say it's because there's complexity in the way that men and women carry themselves, and the fluidity of their own balance of masculine and feminine. There's things that one one gender might have more of than the other, but I don't know one single thing that I could say is like the defining separation.
What caused matriarchy?
I don't know, but I would assume it's the evolution of humanity, and not to say that patriarchy kind of is to say that it's a less evolved. It's taught us some earlier evolutionary ways of, I guess, how to handle a society and civilization, like through war and through a lot of that kind of dominance and assertiveness and imperialism and a lot of those kinds of traits. So I'd say that's on the evolution in this track towards something that's a lot more feminine, which is still having that kind of, I don't know, still having power, but using it in a way that's a lot more diplomatic and also allows for the creative piece that we're talking about before, bringing in art and compassion and creativity towards solutions.
Yeah, beautiful. How do you find peace of mind?
Was that?
How do you find peace of mind?
Letting go more and just trusting in higher purpose for why we're all here and why we live here. I think knowing how to let go of that, which takes learning and patience, but I think in that process of just letting go, you can let go of a lot of strain that can disrupt peace.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
I guess I haven't thought. Rights seem like they have a lot more to do with the individual and the internal and their own personal processes of what they've understood to be moral or immoral, but then responsibility is its duty and its obligation. So it's touching more on maybe an external idea of what our obligations are. And that's not to say one is more important than the other, but it's to say that I think they're rooted from responsibilities come from the outside world and our duties, but rights come from internal and potentially external too.
Utah Phillips is an important folk singing activist. He said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not others. Who's entitled to make rules? Who should make the rules?
I think it depends on what they're ruling over. So I think in most settings, it's beneficial to have diversity in the rulemaking. So if you're talking about an organization of any sort or a group, it values from having more than one voice be the creator of rules. And the more you're able to take diversity and use it towards a solidified shared goal, the more effective you can be in whatever rules you make.
Yeah. If you were walking down the street today, Noreen, and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Life is going to be a lot more bizarre than you could have ever imagined.
That is a great word, bizarre.
Yeah. And it's going to be worth it because it seems far too small. It felt far too small at 12, but I think it's.
But it seems as though you've had fun, but you're also, I'm curious you pretty much nailed it. You said you just have great parents and great sisters, but your compassion for helping people, is it more how you were raised with your family or more on your own? I'm just curious. You sort of answered it, but how would you approach that?
Yeah. I think it's both. I think it's strongly my family, and it's my sisters. They've gone through different paths, but they're definitely they're very compassionate people too. And I think that we learned I know for me, it's doing work that's in service is really my way of not knowing how to say thank you. And for so long, I've just felt really grateful. And so there's I felt this need to do something with that gratitude. And the best place to put that is trying to support people who don't have those same circumstances. And so it's for me, it's come from gratitude and for being given that much compassion early on.
And here's sort of the flip. There's a saying that goes, what you resist persists, or you create what you resist. And Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. And James Joyce even took it farther. He says it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. So just in general, philosophies of people in general and artists, one creates what one resists. I'm not saying I believe that or not, just your feelings on that thought.
Could you repeat it one more time?
You create what you resist.
I'd say there's truth to that, because that has to do with duality and us being unconscious of the other side of things when we're really focused on one part of it. And so I think the Bob Dole quote is really interesting because I think there's truth in that too, that you go to that there's your association towards the things that you hate, and it's because it's still connected to you in some way. If it can cause that kind of visceral reaction, there's something in association to you. So I think it's because whether or not you're looking at it or conscious of it, there's a duality to everything, and there's another side to everything.
I like that word duality. It evokes the yin yang. But on your page, you also quote Sonia Sotomayor. What's her name? Sotomayor?
Sotomayor, yeah. Sotomayor is how I've heard her say it, which
Sotomayor. And it basically boils down to the quality of what you've done today is what's important.
Yeah.
Suss that out. Is that be here now? What does that mean? The quality.
Yeah, I love hearing it from somebody who made it to become who got to the highest level of court, and who's also a woman of color, and is able to do that, and created that with this philosophy of just trying to do the best in every phase of it. And that was from I think the book is My Beloved Life, where she just talks about her story, and you just see somebody who has that level of ambition and everything, and she's stellar in her school, stellar in everything that she's doing, because she has this mentality of it's what you put in today. And that just resonates a lot with me, because we live in a society where we're really thinking about a lot of those ambitions, but it's how you show up on the day-to-day level. Going back to that Groundhog's Day, it matters how you show up on that day-to-day level more than this bigger piece. And if you do that, that's how you get to create success and look back and go, it all adds up at a certain level. But it's about being present, I guess, too. It's the quality of what you do today is bring your A game in that day. It's when you wake up in the morning, how do you want to show up? How do you think about who you want to be in the day? Is it going to be somebody that's just looking 10 years ahead and focused on just this hypothetical idea, or is it somebody who's going to show up and be present to all of these things that are around them?
Really cool. We're coming to a close. I got a couple more, then we'll ask Rob to ask a question or two. These are the 5 Alan Watts questions, really briefly, just in a couple words. First one is, who started it all?
No fucking clue.
That's
okay.
good. Are we?
Is it us? I don't. Maybe we did in another form that we're not aware of. I don't know.
I like the first. No fucking clue. Is it us? That's a question too. Okay. Are we going to make it?
Just be more compassionate, be more loving, but just also just live a little more. I don't know.
Beautiful. Where do we put it?
Say it again.
Where do we put it?
Where do we
put? P-U-T.
Where do we put?
Where do we put it?
Oh, I don't know, in our hearts.
Beautiful. Who's cleaning it up?
The lovers.
Is it serious?
Sometimes.
Beautiful. Well, this has been truly stellar and enlightening, Noreen. I'm so grateful to you, and we're going to bring Rob on because I know he's always listening, and this guy knows a lot. We got a doozy here, huh, Rob? What an amazing woman.
Oh, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noreen.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you got there, Rob?
Well, the topic was so great because it was talking about, you know, sociology, how we get to be where we are. And I don't know if this was answered, but you seem to be so into the humanness of individuals. And I think that that's one thing that you mentioned is that we dehumanize homeless people, you know, vagabonds, et cetera, et cetera. How is it that people in your traveling that they've got to that state? What's usually their story? Because I have theories of how people end up there, but I'm curious to know if you see a common thread.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've heard so many diverse stories myself that I don't know. I don't know what the common thread is. The level of diversity of it, and I've talked to unhoused people who really talk about the breadth and expansiveness of. There's as many diverse people in an unhoused community as there are people in housed communities, and that can't just be stereotyped as one thing. So I don't know what the thread is, but it's yeah, and I think the stories that they range. I mean, there's people who assume that every person who's out on the streets is just wants to be there, and I've met a lot of people who do, but there's complexity in why they want to, or their reasons for that. And then you also meet people who have just gone through horrific circumstances, or their parents went through these circumstances, and now they live it out as another generation. And so there's a whole range of what's bringing people out there. But I think, I don't know, it's when we're talking about the stigmas of unhoused people, it's like it's still related to the kinds of stereotypes that we can have about anybody. And but there is something about class here too, where we're talking about an entire community who's the most disenfranchised, that has the lowest voice, and we're talking and is also disproportionately made of Black and brown people, especially Black people who don't make the majority of the city, but then have a far higher population in the unhoused community. So there's systematic things that are creating this also, and oppression and racism that create that. But it's there. I guess more when I'm talking about like this connection with people, it just seems like we're not touching enough on those voices and trying to change the perceptions of some of the stereotypes that people have about everybody, because
we're all just individuals here.
Yeah.
Exactly. So okay, last question for you, and I'm wondering what your gut answer response to this is why do we suffer?
I've been trying to learn that for a long time, and I don't know who I want to quote right now. I can't remember it, but I'm hoping that it's toward, if this is a school, if that we're living in this reality as a school to learn something, then it's towards this. I think I've asked this question to enough people who are sage and who just keep pushing that it's towards us growing into a better, more evolved state, and that that suffering is the negative to something that's on the other side, and it's towards creating that, and that we need that full picture of going through that to experience the contrast. But I don't know. It's I would like to get a better answer on that. I mean, do you have? Yeah.
Oh well, if I had to guess, I'd say that suffering, hopefully, it can make us more compassionate. That, you know, when I see somebody hurt, like I love helping people. It sounds like you love helping people.
Yeah.
You know, there's something that you get from that, and well, I guess it goes to this: if every day was a good day, what would a good day be? I don't know.
Really?
I don't think that's a very good answer, but here's my last question for you. What gives you the greatest hope?
knowing connecting with as many people who care about compassion as I do, and knowing enough stories of people doing compassionate things, that gives me hope.
Awesome. Well, you give me hope, I'll tell you that.
You give me hope too. This is inspiring to have this conversation.
You really touched on a lot, Rob, in those, because why do we suffer is a good lead-in to this. I just have a couple more questions, Noreen, if you have. Those were brilliant, Rob. Thank you. It was a good lead-in to this because Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're usually taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness that you've turned into a strength, Noreen.
I'm working on the weakness. This feels like a job interview. Like, what are my weaknesses of
You're hired.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No, I'd say like working through fear and anxiety. Just, I think in social work, it was a lot of learning how to not carry the suffering that others are going through with you in this process, and putting more focus on what can get created, and knowing that that's just as true as what somebody's currently going through. And to be there for somebody, you don't have to just be carrying their pain with them, and that's actually not helpful. That's just more people who are carrying the same suffering. It's to be somebody who's a support to them and is also able to help them guide, just be see a light that can help them towards seeing, and that goes both ways at different times. It's not to say one person carries that, but yeah, that was a winded answer for.
No, that was good. It actually evoked amazing. In the McLuhan world, we call it, how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough, or a rejection into a redirection? So there's a woman I want you to meet if you haven't met her. She's at Rose in the Boardwalk, and she set up this garden, and she's an amazing homeless person. I mean, she is loving, and she's always doing, and when they cleared the boardwalk, it was like, dude, make an exception. She said, so she's got to pick all her stuff up every night.
Yeah, and
move it to 1 block away, and then every morning move it back.
Yeah.
She said she could complain. I says, they should have made an exception. I know they can't make an exception, but they should have made an exception for you. You were a guiding light to Venice. Everybody loves her plants and everything. She goes, no, I've been able to get better exercise moving all my stuff. And it was like, that's why when you asked, Rob, why do we suffer, is because it's how you use the word suffer. It's like, why do we shift a rejection into a redirection? Because that's probably the human condition. Marcel Duchamp even said it better. There's no solution because there's no problem. So, you could just say, Noreen is just helping people get in touch with their empathy. Or you could say, oh, she's helping the homeless. And then that says, oh, homeless means there's a problem. But you could say, getting in touch with their empathy, every human wants to have that. Get in touch with their compassion and their love for other humans. But this was really fun. I'll close it out with this one. Like Rob, you says, I just have one more question. Wait, I just have one more question.
I'm good at that.
We don't want you to go. Okay, Noreen, what's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today?
I might have said this already, but connection and yeah, the growth in connection. Because I think we're learning how to collaborate more, and we're learning how to empower one another more, and I think that eliminates I don't know. I think we're coming into a future where more people can feel confident in themselves and not shoot others down at those spaces. Like, there's enough space for everybody to be incredible, and I think we're getting into a future where that understanding might be, but potential. There's a possibility of it, or it can go in the complete other direction. We don't know.
Anyways, Noreen, what a pleasure. Thank you so much. Rob, you're the best. Both of you. I really learned a lot, and I thank you.
You guys are awesome. Thank you
you.
so much for this. Thank you for amazing questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody.